And the South African government and refugee advocates are rebuking the Trump administration for welcoming 59 white South Africans as refugees. The president told reporters Monday he admitted the refugees because of the, quote, genocide that's taking place. South Africa recently passed a new expropriation act which aims to address historical land injustices established during apartheid. Now, South Africa's government strongly disputes Trump's characterization, saying there is no persecution of white Afrikaners in this country. Let's bring in Professor Ruth Hall from the University of Western Cape in South Africa for more on this. Professor Hall, thanks for joining us. Can you just start by explaining the Expropriation Act, what it does, and why it's so controversial?
Thanks, Diane. So the Expropriation Act in South Africa has been long in coming. It's provided for in the Constitution, and it's been nearly 30 years of drafting this law. It does not provide for confiscation of land. What it does is it allows for a legal process reviewable by courts by which the state may compulsorily acquire property for certain purposes, including to restore that property to people from whom it was unfairly and unjustly taken in the past. In fact, it's the right of eminent domain. It's the same right that's enshrined in the American Constitution in the Fifth Amendment. In fact, it's quite a standard practice around the world that states have a right of eminent domain. What's striking here is that a legal process and a democratic state has established this right in law in South Africa. It is comparable to similar legislation around the world, and it has not yet been used. So it's entirely incorrect when President Trump characterizes this as a process of stealing land from white people or confiscating land. So there's a serious problem of misrepresentation of what the law is actually for. And I think that this has fed into a response in which an attempt to start to take steps towards redressing racial inequality from colonialism and from apartheid is seen as unfair discrimination. This is a narrative that has been promoted around this issue.
You say the law mostly clarifies powers the government already had for decades. What do you mean by that?
So the Constitution that was adopted in the Mandela years in 1996 said that the state must redistribute land and restore it to Black South Africans who were unfairly dispossessed during apartheid. That process has been very slow. And up to now, the South African government has gone to landowners and offered to buy out property at market prices, even though the Constitution clarified that it could expropriate where needed. This current new law says that where it is unable to acquire land through other means, the state may take the property in question, a claimed farm, for instance, or a portion of a farm. And if the owner is not willing to sell at market price, it may expropriate that. And it should pay compensation that a court deems is just and fair, which may or may not be at market price. So it is taking a constitutional right and it's operationalizing it in law. And what this means is that in the future, the state could choose to depart from the norm of paying market level compensation. It hasn't happened yet. And in fact, most commentators, including my own institute, which has been following this for 30 years, have severe doubts as to whether the South African government has any intention to actually implement this law. So far, it is a law that is required by our constitution, but it has been equated, I think, in the public mind in parts of the West and among some of the white supremacist groups globally. It has been equated with the Zimbabwean land reform, in which white farmers were kicked off their land without compensation or without any kind of legal process. So in my mind, this is a lot of smoke around something which has not happened.
So why do we now have these dozens coming over here claiming to be refugees? President Trump is calling this process racial persecution. He also says there's race-based genocide in South Africa because of this law. What's your response to that?
It's entirely fallacious. There is no data to back up the claim that there is a white genocide underway in South Africa. Last year, in the first 9 months, there were 19,000 murders of which only 50 took place on farms. And most of the data shows that less than 10% of the murders on farms were of white landowners. The vast majority of those murders were of poor Black farm workers. So, there is this narrative. It's not the first time it has been promoted. South African right-wing organizations are very well networked with similar organizations in the US, in Australia, in parts of Europe, and have promoted this idea that white Afrikaners are subject to persecution. As you can see from the images scrolling right now, these are people who are mostly middle class or lower middle class, who have not had their lives directly threatened. It's in many senses, what is happening here is an existing privileged group within South Africa is claiming a need for asylum status in the US. It's become the laughingstock of South Africa. Online memes are going mad about it. South Africa is actually the most unequal society in the world, in which the vast majority of the poor who suffer the most violence are Black. And so what is being done here is so at odds with reality on the ground. What some observers in South Africa have said is that this has got to do actually with other things. It's got to do with geopolitics. It's got to do with South Africa's role in the BRICS and in the International Court of Justice case on Gaza. And it has to do with the performance of the US, which has closed its borders to many people who are facing violent persecution in their home countries, wars, and so on, and instead privileging a small group of relatively well-off white people from South Africa who are arguing that any move towards transformation constitutes discrimination. So it's most unfortunate. It's making South Africa look bad. But also, I have to say, many South Africans say, if they don't want to be part of a racially integrated society, let them go.
All right, Professor Ruth Hall, we appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you.